Hello, family members. I hope you're having a nice day today. I want to do something a little different today. This is going to be me just basically begging for Fantasia 2030 to be a thing. Like, really. And geeking out about how much I love Fantasia and Fantasia 2000 and some of the early highly segmented Disney animated works. And so let's get into it. I know that Disney does the animated shorts thing now. And I think that's sort of the spiritual successor to Fantasia in some ways. But really, it's kind of not, because Fantasia was a very specific thing. Fantasia was like experimentation using music and animation. The original Fantasia had primarily classical music and then animations to interpret it. But it also had what do they call it? The Sorcerer's Apprentice with Mickey, which was actually contemporary music that was written for that. And actually that segment was sort of more traditional Disney segment, like this kind that you would see in, say, Three Caballeros or Saludos Amigos, you know, Melody Time. There were like some collections of different little miniature stories sort of loosely stitched together. And Sorcerer's Apprentice was really going to be one of those. But then this grand idea for the concert picture, the original Fantasia, came to light, and it was decided to put it in there and sort of created a iconic image for Disney and for Mickey that is maybe more enduring than a lot of the other imagery in Fantasia, although there's a lot in Fantasia that still, you see in pop culture pretty often. Of course, from the very last segment, when you have basically the big old devil come out of the mountain on Walpurgis night. Oh gosh, I love that. I love it. But the original Fantasia, I think it's pretty well known, was meant to be a living piece, and new pieces would be added, and it could be reshown with some of the originals and new stuff, and constantly be experimenting. And obviously that didn't really happen again until 2000. And the one thing I really love about Fantasia 2000 is it's such an interesting time capsule of where animation was at that time. You have this like early kind of clunky CGI in places. You have, your traditional 2D animation. Rhapsody in Blue, I think, is one of the most wonderful segments. It's just the amount they're able to express in that segment. It's so amazing. They develop 4 characters pretty well, give them arcs, and give them satisfying stories, all without words. And they all kind of overlap in interesting ways. It's a really masterfully done segment. And all the pieces just fit together so well. And I think the reason why it's so creative is because they were working around a piece of music. Like, I think having to work around a piece of music really makes you have to think out of the box and be very creative. And so I think that would be one benefit of doing a Fantasia 3000, as it were. You could have classical music, like literally classical music, the style, the genre, but also like music that is classics from an earlier era, maybe public domain music that is orchestrated that you could also use to make interesting pieces the way they did with Rhapsody in Blue. I'd be interested to see a straight up remake of the dinosaur segment. I mean, think about how interesting it would be to see that whole segment just completely remade with what we know now. Because that's another thing about the original Fantasia that is super fascinating. If you know anything about dinosaurs or paleontology, anything like that, watching that segment, and it was a very cutting edge, very accurate at the time of their understanding, view of, prehistory, the time of the dinosaurs, what happened to the dinosaurs, all of that. It is fascinating. It's possibly the slowest segment in the original Fantasia. I think that a lot of times that's where people kind of like, if you get really high and sit around and watch Fantasia with a bunch of people, that might be where they drift off to sleep. Because the music is not necessarily the most compelling, but if you're interested in that kind of stuff, if you're interested in dinosaurs or the history of scientific thought, it's fascinating, okay? And so imagine what they could do if they did an updated version of that, with the same music or different music. I don't even care, I just would love to see Disney Now's version of that. That would be interesting. And, I think it would be a really cool thing to see what they would do with that first segment too. Because traditionally, the first segment is what they call absolute music. Music that is made for its own sake, doesn't have any, deeper meaning. And so you can't just literally recreate it. And so they often use very like abstract or impressionistic kind of visual language when they're trying to, sort of illustrate these songs. And I'd like to see what the 2030 animation version of that would be. Find some very abstract song and then like push the limits of what you can show as an expression of abstract music in animation in 2030. Like that's something I think could potentially be very influential and really set the tone for animation for decades to come, Like Disney used to do this kind of stuff. Like people kind of forget what an anomaly Snow White was at the time. Like they didn't make another princess movie until a long time afterwards. They didn't make Cinderella and Sleeping Beauty right after they made Snow White. There were like decades in between. And early Disney looked a lot more like Fantasia than it did like Snow White. But modern Disney looks a lot more like that sort of archetype that Snow White started and has sort of relegated the, shorter pieces of animation as like supplemental things. They haven't tried to piece it together and make a feature the way that they would do in the past. I really, really like Saludos Amigos and Three Caballeros, and that's because it's not only just a collection of vignettes, but there's connective tissue. There is sort of a narrative conclusion that you're building towards, Both of those are more than just the sum of their parts because they're presented as a feature and given context the way that Disney shorts these days often aren't. The other thing is Disney shorts these days, they always seem to really want to say something almost dark. And I often find the tone of the animated shorts, although they're often very beautiful, like super tragic. And I don't quite understand the logic there. Like the little matchstick girl, whoever made that, I want to punch him in the face. I freaking cried the entire time. That story is torment. It's torture. I hate it. Why would anyone want to make that? It makes me so angry. And you don't see that tone in the features, in the Fantasias. You know, you have the steadfast tin soldier. He gets a happy ending. Pretty much everybody in Rhapsody in Blue gets a happy ending except for the annoying wife character, which, you know, that's, you know, misogyny, but that's how it also is in a lot of ways in the world. Anyway, you know, even the storm in the Greek segment, you know, it ends with the sun coming out and this rainbow Iris, one of my favorite characters in all of Disney, and she's like on the screen for like milliseconds, it seems like. Anyway, but there's a triumph, there's a satisfying resolution. It takes you on a full story. Every single Fantasia segment pretty much takes you on a full story. You know, you go from, gosh, I can't even think of the name. This is making me look dumb. Oh, thank you. I am dumb. You're right. No, I'm just kidding. But you go from Night on Bald Mountain to Ave Maria. You know, there's a satisfying resolution. You go from the nature is green and wonderful to fire and destruction to nature is green and wonderful again at the end of Fantasia 2000. Even the Donald Duck segment, which I think is kind of Disney of the era, you know, that they were making Fantasia 2000, like their attempt to do sort of the Sorcerer's Apprentice, but modernized or something. I don't know. It was a very interesting choice to use pomp and circumstances, really. But that's the same thing that they did with the Nutcracker Suite. There we go. I'm sorry. My dry mouth's been bad lately. Anyway. So yeah, like in the Nutcracker Suite, they wanted to take everything related to the Nutcracker and remove it and put in something different. And so they put in this change of the seasons and fairies and flowers and stuff. It was really neat. And when they decided to sort of do a similar thing with Pomp and Circumstances and retell the story of Noah with Donald Duck and Daisy Duck being, you know, sort of side characters who are viewing the whole events from, you know, being part of it and everything. I think it's a really cute segment, and I think that it's got a really satisfying narration too, you know. I mean, it's a little overwrought, but it's kind of fun, you know. It's Donald Duck and Daisy Duck, who I love Daisy Duck. Like, yeah, I know. I'm a Disney adult. It's shameful, but it is who I am. Anyway, so I think that there would be really interesting to see an updated version of that, say in Fantasia 2030. You know, in the original Fantasia, we had Mickey, right? And then we have Donald and Daisy in the next one. Well, you know, maybe have like Goofy or Minnie or one of the other, Pluto in as the main character in some sort of story. You know what? I actually thought about that before. I thought would be really cool would be if they took Goofy and his son Max and did some sort of like, classical story of a father and son and retold it with them. I couldn't think of any good classical stories other than like Icarus that had a father and son. And that's probably not the best one, but that probably could be a very funny thing. I could see Goofy and Max as Icarus and Daedalus. That would be interesting. So I don't know. And then they put it to like, what's a piece of classical music that is really, really well known and already has a lot of like very specific connotations. Okay, maybe, maybe, what's the song from Twilight? Oh gosh, I can't even think of it right now, but yeah. Uh, if you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. There's some, oh gosh, it's Debussy. Oh gosh, I see, that's the thing. I always see the names, I don't hear them spoken. What is that? Nah, it's in my head, but I can't get it out. I'm sorry. But I mean, this is what I'm talking about. Like, there's so many different ways that they could take Fantasia 2030 and make it really interesting and exciting. And, you know, I would love to see that. I think that Fantasia gets slept on a lot, but I think Fantasia 2000 gets slept on a lot more. Again, Rhapsody in Blue alone is such a great segment. I mean, I don't know why people don't like geek out over that all the time because it is so good, and it's such efficient storytelling and such an interesting art style. Like I can't get over how good it is. And then you have stuff like our dear James Earl Jones introducing the the flamingos and the yo-yo segment, which is just bonkers. But it's so much fun and it's cute. It's a unique animation style. Imagine what modern Disney can do if they could do that then, you know? I want to know. I want to know what the animators could really do if they were truly challenged in ways that I don't think that the current Disney output really fosters. Like, I love princess stories. I love the like musical princess stories. Ariel was like a dear favorite of mine when I was a kid. Like, I already loved the story of the Little Mermaid, and then they made a Disney movie of it while I was at the right age to appreciate it. Like, that was my stuff. And of course, we had so many wonderful things that come out after that. Like, I still remember seeing Beauty and the Beast in theaters. I remember exactly where I was and who I was with, Like, that was a special moment, like a theatrical moment in my life. I'm a huge, like, Mulan fan. Oh, geez. I love the Disney musicals because I love to sing along to musicals. Lion King. Oh my gosh, even the score for Lion King is just beautiful, beautiful. I absolutely love some of that more narrative-driven Disney output, but I would love to see the vignette, not the big, you know, movie length story all the time. I would love to see them get to do what they did in both of the Fantasias. You know, if you go back and you watch Fantasia and really look at the animation quality, it really, it's unbelievable. And even when you go back to, say, Three Caballeros, it's kind of surprising to me when you see how good the live action parts are, like how high quality the actual filming is. You know, Disney was able to make the best things they could possibly make. And they had, you know, Miranda, what's her name? Not Carmen Miranda, but her sister, Aurora Miranda, dancing with Joe Carioca and Donald Duck, like way at the beginning of animation, like things that would have probably been impressive to people in the 90s. They were pulling it off in like the 40s, I think. It's wild, you know? And I think that when the purpose is telling a story, the artistic creativity is not the driving force. But when you have something that's focused around a song, then the song is already set. You don't have to put any energy into that. And all you have left is that visual language. And it challenges you in ways that I think other types of animation can't do. You know, it like really impresses me. Not to geek out about Rhapsody in Blue again, but I mean, like the way that they use all of the little musical flourishes that are in the song already to drive the plot. I mean, it is something that they are echoing from the, you know, the Dionysus segment at the end. Well, not the end, but you know, with the centaurs and the Pegasus, I don't know. all the mythological beings. There's a really good pacing and a really good like utilization of the instrumentation to create interesting, exciting moments in the animation as well. It's not just about like a vibe, it's about like almost like Foley work in some ways, like sound effects. You know, they find ways to make the music that is already existing, the extant music that they're working from, into sound effects for the story they want to tell. That's really interesting. That drives an excitement, you know? I just think that it would be quite fascinating. I think it would be really nice to do what they did with some of those songs and help popularize them. You know, there's a lot of really wonderful symphonic music out there that just doesn't really get the highlight that it deserves. You know, a lot of times the symphonic music that we hear today that's kind of in any way commercial is like score music, and that's always second fiddle. And when you have a feature like Fantasia making these vignettes, the music and the animation are working together. It's like a duet rather than a backup singer, you know? And I think it just gives a lot more opportunity for people to truly understand and appreciate the music for itself, which I think is a very enriching thing. You know, there's a lot of very talented composers out there who I think we deserve to hear, that we just don't know as much as we ought to. And, like Toccata and Fugue from Fantasia, the original Fantasia, I don't think I would have ever really understood that song or put much thought into what it even was until I knew it because of Fantasia. And that fugue thing, where it's like that repetition, I find that really interesting musically, because it's not easy to do in a way that sounds like natural, and it really works. And I wouldn't have taken the time to pick that apart and understand that without the familiarity that Fantasia gave me. I think that it's just a golden opportunity that they have. They waited such a long time between Fantasia and Fantasia 2000 that the concept maybe even was just too novel in a weird way in 2000. Maybe it was either too far behind or too far ahead of its time. I'm not sure, but I'd love to see that. And you can't tell me that wouldn't do well on Disney Plus streaming. You get a bunch of weird people like me, middle-aged people, do a bunch of drugs and sit around and watch Fantasia 3000, I could see that being a cultural moment almost, kind of like Wizard of Oz and Dark Side of the Moon or whatever, I don't know. That's something I'd really like to see. And so as I said, this video was just basically me begging for that. All right, family members, I guess I ought to let you go. Kimmy says hi. You want to say hi to him a little bit more? Want to say hi? That's Kimmy. It is Kimmy. It is. Well, take care of yourself, family members. I'll talk to you later. Bye.